The day my father looked me in the eyes and said, "You are no longer my son," something inside me didn't break, it hardened. They erased my name from the family business, from the inheritance, from the house I was born in, all because I chose soil over silk, fields over boardrooms, honesty over their polished lies. My family owns half the skyline of this city. Towers of glass with our last name shining at the top. Wealth, power, influence, they breathe it like oxygen. And I chose to breathe dust. I loved farming. Not as a hobby, not as a phase, it was the only place I ever felt in control. While they manipulated stocks and politicians, I studied seasons and rain. While they made enemies in silence, I planted seeds in it. They called me a disgrace. At family dinners, my brothers would laugh. "Look at him," Daniel would say, adjusting his designer watch. "Smells like cows and calls it ambition." My mother never defended me. She just avoided my eyes. The final blow came the night of the annual gala. Investors, media, cameras flashing. My father stood on stage, glass of champagne in hand, and tonight, he announced proudly, "I officially hand over future leadership to my eldest son." Applause thundered. Then he looked at me, standing near the back in a simple suit. And as for my younger son, he has chosen a different path. A small, insignificant one. The room laughed. That was the night Disowned me papers were signed. My access revoked. My trust fund frozen. My name quietly removed from company records. They thought they had reduced me to nothing. What they didn't know was that I had been watching. For years. While they underestimated me, I learned more than crops and cattle. I studied markets at night. I built connections they would never suspect. Small investors. Rural suppliers, independent distributors tired of being crushed by my family's monopoly. I started small, a cooperative. Local farmers pooling resources, ethical sourcing, transparent pricing, they mocked it publicly. But quietly we grew. What my family never understood about farming is this: growth is invisible at first. Beneath the surface, roots spreading in silence. And by the time it breaks through the soil, it's already too late to stop it. Within 3 years, our cooperative wasn't just surviving, it was expanding. What started as 12 struggling farmers sharing equipment became a network of hundreds across multiple provinces. We cut out middlemen. We negotiated directly with retailers. We offered something my family's empire never could: fairness. Their corporation had dominated agricultural imports for decades. Cheap foreign produce, aggressive contracts, farmers trapped in debt cycles they could never escape. And I knew their system from the inside. I knew where they cut corners. I knew how they pressured suppliers. I knew how fragile their unstoppable empire really was. But revenge isn't rage. Revenge is patience sharpened into precision. I didn't attack them directly. Not at first. Instead, I did something worse. I made them irrelevant. Our produce was better. Organic, transparent. Consumers started noticing. Influencers began talking about ethical food movements. Restaurants proudly displayed our cooperative's name on menus. The media called it inspiring. My father called it annoying, then threatening, then dangerous. The first call came from Daniel. "I hear you've been busy playing businessman," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Cute little rebellion?" "It's not rebellion," I replied calmly. "It's competition." He laughed. "You don't compete with us. You left." I was pushed. Silence. Then, coldly careful. The market can be brutal. I smiled into the phone. I know, I learned from the best. A month later, inspections began. Random audits, health checks, regulatory pressure. Suppliers suddenly backing out of deals. Trucks delayed without explanation. They were squeezing. Old tactics. Predictable tactics. What they didn't know was that I had anticipated every move. Before expanding, I had built legal armor. Contracts reviewed by independent firms. Compliance teams double-checking every shipment. Digital transparency systems allowing customers to track produce from seed to shelf. When regulators came, we welcomed them. When media caught wind of corporate harassment, we didn't deny it. We told our story. The headlines shifted. Local cooperative faces pressure from industry giant. Small farmers stand against corporate monopoly. My family's stock dipped for the first time in 15 years. That's when my father finally called me himself. "You've made your point," he said, his voice older than I remembered. "Enough games." "This isn't a game," I replied. "You think you can dismantle what I built?" "No," I said quietly. "I think you dismantled it yourself." He exhaled sharply. "You are still my son. I stopped being your son the night you erased me." Another silence. He tried a different tactic. "Come back. We'll restructure. You can head the agricultural division. Legitimately, no more dirt under your fingernails." There it was. Not reconciliation, control. "I like the dirt," I said. "It reminds me what growth looks like." He hung up. That was when I moved to phase 2. You see, while building the cooperative, I wasn't just helping farmers, I was gathering data, quietly buying shares through third-party firms. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. During every dip caused by public backlash, I bought. During every scandal about unethical imports, I bought more. No one noticed the pattern. Why would they? To them, I was just a stubborn farmer with a grudge. By the time they realized what was happening, it was already too late. I wasn't attacking from the outside anymore. I was inside. At the next annual shareholders meeting, the same gala hall where I had once been humiliated, the atmosphere was tense. Media rumors had spread. Stock instability, internal disagreements. Daniel stood on stage, attempting tempting confidence. Then the voting session began. A proposal was introduced to restructure executive leadership due to strategic mismanagement and reputational damage. Daniel smirked until the numbers started appearing on the screen. One by one, major voting blocks aligned in favor. His smile faded. My father's face turned pale. And then my name was announced, not as a disgraced son, not as a simple farmer, but as the largest individual shareholder present. Gasps filled the hall. I stood up slowly. This time I wore no designer suit, just a clean, tailored jacket. Simple, calm. I walked to the stage without rushing. Every step echoed. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You planned this." For years, I replied. My father looked at me with something I had never seen before. Not anger, not pride, fear. "You would destroy your own family." He asked quietly. I met his gaze. "You destroyed it first." The board voted. Leadership dissolved. Emergency restructuring approved. Control shifted. But here's the part they never expected. I didn't dismantle the company. I transformed it. I eliminated predatory contracts, cleared farmer debts, shifted sourcing toward ethical partnerships, merged their global distribution power with our cooperative network. Overnight, the empire they built on pressure became a system rooted in sustainability. Profits stabilized, public trust soared, stock recovered stronger than before. Daniel resigned within months. My father stepped down quietly. And I kept my boots. Every week I still visit the fields, I still walk through soil at sunrise, I still speak directly to farmers whose hands are cracked from honest work. But now, when contracts are signed, they are fair. When profits are made, they are shared. And when my family name shines on buildings across the skyline, it stands for something different. They disowned me for being simple. They thought farming meant small. They never understood that farmers don't just grow crops. We grow patience, we grow resilience, we grow power beneath the surface. And when the harvest comes, it belongs to the one who planted the seeds. Power changes people, but real power reveals them. Once I took control, the whispers began. He did it for revenge. He'll crush them slowly. He's just like his father. They were wrong. Revenge was never about burning everything down. It was about rebuilding it in my image. But power attracts enemies the way light attracts insects. Old allies of my father didn't disappear when he stepped down. They retreated. Investors who thrived on exploitation. Executives who built careers on squeezing farmers dry. Politicians who preferred donations over ethics. They smiled at me in meetings. They plotted behind my back. I could feel it shifting. Contracts delayed. Board members subtly resisting reforms. Anonymous articles questioning my experience. They thought I was emotional. They thought I was sentimental. They still thought I was the boy who chose dirt over dominance. What they didn't understand was that farming teaches you something critical. Storms are predictable if you watch the sky long enough. And I had been watching. One night, my chief financial officer, a man who had worked under my father for 20 years, requested a private meeting. He closed the door carefully. "There's pressure," he said quietly. "From who?" I asked. He hesitated. "External investors, they want margins back to old levels. They're saying the ethical model is inefficient." "Inefficient?" I repeated calmly. He nodded. "They're threatening to pull capital." I leaned back in my chair. "Let them." His eyes widened. "If they withdraw at once, it'll create instability. Not if we're prepared." And we were. While restructuring the company, I had done something my father never bothered to do. I diversified ownership. Small stakeholders, employee share programs, farmer equity pools, community investment bonds. Our strength wasn't concentrated in a few greedy hands anymore. It was distributed. If the old guard wanted out, they could leave. And they did. Within weeks, 3 major investors pulled funding. Media spun it as crisis. Stock dipped again. Analysts predicted collapse. Daniel even appeared on a business talk show, shaking his head. "Leadership requires ruthlessness," he said. "My brother is too idealistic." I watched the interview without reacting. Then I made my move. Instead of scrambling for corporate replacements, I opened public investment access. Minimum buy-in lowered. Transparent quarterly reports streamed live. Open forums for shareholders. For the first time in company history, farmers themselves could own part of the distribution chain. The response was explosive. Communities rallied. Employees doubled down. Customers invested emotionally and financially. The stock didn't just recover. It stabilized in a way it never had before, less volatile, less dependent on a handful of sharks. That's when the attacks turned personal. Late one evening, as I drove back from the fields, headlights blinded my rearview mirror. A black SUV followed too closely. Then another. Not random. Intentional. My phone rang. A no number. "You should have stayed in the dirt," a distorted voice said. "Empires aren't taken without consequences." The line went dead. I didn't report it. Not yet. Fear is contagious at the top. If leadership panics, the structure trembles. Instead, I increased private security quietly. Strengthened digital firewalls. Audited internal communications. And I found something. A board member, one of my father's oldest allies, had been leaking strategic information to a competing conglomerate, a rival corporation waiting for us to stumble so they could initiate a hostile takeover. They assumed I wouldn't look that deep. They assumed I was too busy playing farmer. I called for an emergency board session. No warnings. No hints. When everyone was seated, I projected the evidence on the screen. Emails. Financial trails. Recorded calls. The room froze. The board member turned pale. This is taken out of context. He stammered, "Is it?" I asked calmly, "Silence. Betrayal tastes different when you're prepared for it." Security escorted him out. Lawsuits followed. The rival corporation backed off publicly, claiming miscommunication. But I knew better. They were testing me, so I tested them back. Using our improved supply chain and cooperative network, I undercut their distribution contracts in key regions. Not illegally, not aggressively, strategically. We offered better rates because we didn't exploit our producers. Within 6 months, they lost 2 major retail chains. And suddenly, the simple farmer wasn't naive anymore. He was dangerous. At home, things were quieter. My father rarely left his estate now. Age had softened him. Or maybe defeat had. One afternoon, unexpectedly, he came to the fields. No cameras, no drivers, just him. He stepped out of the car slowly, looking uncomfortable in the open air. I walked toward him, boots sinking into soil. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "This is what you chose," he finally said, "Wes." He looked around at workers moving confidently, equipment operating efficiently, laughter echoing across rows of green. "It's stable," he admitted. "It's honest." He nodded faintly. "I built power through fear," he said quietly. "You built it through loyalty." I didn't respond. After a long pause, he added, "They're coming for you harder than they ever came for me." "I know. And you're ready?" I met his eyes. "I was ready the day you disowned me." Something shifted in his expression, regret maybe, or realization. Before leaving, he said something I never expected to hear. "You've surpassed me," not as a compliment, as a confession. But surpassing him was never the end goal. Transformation was. And transformation is never peaceful. Because just as stability began settling in, a new threat emerged, one far more sophisticated than corporate greed. Government investigations, trade violations accusations, environmental compliance probes, international scrutiny. Someone was pulling strings at a higher level. This wasn't just about profit anymore. This was about influence. And whoever stood behind it wasn't attacking the company. They were attacking me, digging into my past, reopening old family scandals, resurfacing the night I was disowned, twisting the narrative, painting me as unstable, vindictive, power-hungry. They were trying to isolate me, break public trust. And if that didn't work, destroy me legally. But here's the thing about someone who's already been stripped of everything. You can't threaten them with loss. I had already lost my family, my name, my place. Everything after that was strategy. So while they investigated, I investigated back, quietly, carefully. Following money trails, political donations, hidden partnerships between my old rivals, and foreign investment groups. And what I uncovered was bigger than revenge, bigger than business, bigger than my family's empire. It was a network. And I had just stepped into the center of it. The deeper I dug, the uglier it became. Shell companies layered over shell companies. Political donations disguised as agricultural grants. Environmental NGOs funded by the very conglomerates they publicly condemned. It wasn't just business, it was orchestration. And my company, my transformation, had disrupted a supply chain that quietly fed billions into the hands of people who never touched soil. I wasn't being investigated because I failed. I was being investigated because I succeeded without them. The government inquiry escalated quickly. Subpoenas, audits, freezing of certain international transactions, news outlets speculating daily. My legal team worked around the clock. But I knew this wasn't a courtroom battle, it was a pressure game. They wanted me distracted, reactive, desperate. Instead, I went quiet. Public appearances reduced, statements minimal, no emotional interviews. Silence makes powerful people uncomfortable. Behind that silence, I activated something I had built months earlier, an internal intelligence division. Not spies, analysts, data experts. Former investigative journalists hired under compliance roles. While authorities combed through our records, we combed through theirs. Patterns emerged. A senior trade official leading the probe had undisclosed connections to a logistics conglomerate we had recently underbid. A senator pushing for stricter agricultural regulations had received campaign funding from 3 corporations we directly competed against. Coincidence is common, but repetition is proof. Still, proof means nothing unless it's timed correctly. One wrong move, and I would look defensive or worse, guilty. So I waited, and then they made a mistake. A leaked memo surfaced online, anonymously posted, suggesting that the investigation into my company had been prioritized for economic stabilization interests. Economic stabilization. Not legal violation, not environmental harm. Stabilization, translation, protect the old money. Within hours, independent journalists picked it up. Financial bloggers dissected it. Public trust in the investigation wavered. I didn't comment. I simply authorized full transparency. We live-streamed compliance reviews, released internal audit summaries, opened factory doors to third-party inspectors live. If they wanted to examine me under a microscope, I would hand them a brighter lens. Public sentiment shifted rapidly. Supporters rallied not because I asked them to, but because people recognize imbalance when they see it. Farmers posted videos defending the cooperative. Employees shared testimonies. Customers trended hashtags about ethical markets. The pressure started flowing backward. The trade official stepped down for personal reasons. The senator distanced himself from prior donations. The rival conglomerate denied involvement too loudly. But the attacks didn't stop. They escalated. One night, a fire broke out at one of our regional warehouses. Minor damage contained quickly. Officially ruled an electrical malfunction. Unofficially. Too convenient. Security footage glitched at critical moments. Insurance investigators behaved strangely detached. Someone was sending a message, and this time it wasn't subtle. My team urged me to increase distance, work remotely, avoid public exposure, but fear creates narrative, and I refused to let anyone think I was retreating. The next morning, I stood at the warehouse site in front of cameras, smoke still lingering, workers behind me. This company was built in open fields, I said calmly. We're not afraid of fire, no accusations, no finger pointing, just steadiness. Sometimes the strongest response is refusing to flinch, but privately I shifted strategy. Up until now, I had been playing defense, responding, absorbing, stabilizing. It was time to harvest, through months of quiet investigation. My analysts had compiled a comprehensive dossier. Financial trails linking my primary competitor to offshore accounts. Evidence of price manipulation in developing markets. Proof of environmental violations buried under falsified compliance reports. Not rumors, documents. Verified. But exposure is a weapon that must be used carefully. If I released everything at once, it would look like retaliation. If I handed it directly to authorities, it could vanish quietly. So I did something different. I handed it to multiple independent investigative journalists simultaneously, under strict conditions of coordinated publication. No exclusive leverage, no single outlet control. A synchronized release. 3 weeks later, at exactly 9:00 a.m., headlines detonated across financial media. Global conglomerate under investigation for market manipulation. Offshore accounts linked to senior executives. Environmental fraud scandal expands. Stock prices crash within hours. International regulators open formal probes. Investors panicked. The same conglomerate that had quietly pressured my investigation was now fighting for survival. They knew it was me. Of course they did. But they couldn't prove retaliation, because everything released was legitimate. Truth is the most dangerous revenge. Within days, calls started coming in. Board members from the collapsing conglomerate requesting private negotiation. Political intermediaries suggesting settlement talks. Even former rivals offering partnerships. I declined them all. This was never about dominance. It was about equilibrium. When the dust began settling, something unexpected happened. Smaller agricultural businesses, ones previously too afraid to challenge monopolies, started emerging. Independent networks forming. Ethical supply chains multiplying. The market shifted permanently. Not because I crushed my enemies, but because I exposed their foundation. My father visited again weeks later. He looked at me differently now, not as a son, not as a successor. As a force. You've changed the industry, he said quietly. I changed our part of it. I replied. He studied the field stretching beyond the horizon, and the network behind it. He asked carefully. I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was the network wasn't fully dismantled. Pieces remained. Influence doesn't disappear overnight. Power only retreats. They'll rebuild, he said. Yes, I agreed. And when they do, I looked out over the workers, the cooperative leaders, the distribution centers operating with transparency. When they do, I said calmly, they'll find a market that no longer depends on them. He nodded slowly. For the first time in my life, there was no tension between us, only understanding. I was no longer fighting my family. I was protecting something larger. But the game wasn't over. It never is. Because in rooms I hadn't yet entered, conversations were happening. New alliances forming, new strategies drafted. Not all enemies reveal themselves with threats or fire. Some wait, and I've learned something vital through all of this. Revenge is an event. Power is a cycle. And cycles never truly end, they evolve. I built my empire from soil and silence. I exposed giants without raising my voice. I survived being erased. But somewhere out there, someone is studying me the way I once studied my father. Watching, learning, waiting for their season to strike. And when that season comes, I won't be surprised. Because farmers don't just prepare for harvest. We prepare for drought. And I am always prepared. Seasons passed, but the tension never fully dissolved. Power, once disturbed, never sleeps peacefully again. For nearly a year, the market stabilized under the new model. Ethical sourcing became standard. Independent cooperatives multiplied across regions that had once been monopolized. Investors who once chased aggressive margins began marketing sustainability instead. On the surface, it looked like victory. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. I started noticing patterns again. Minor disruptions in international shipments. Sudden regulatory changes in countries we were expanding into. Strategic acquisitions of struggling farms by anonymous holding companies. Someone wasn't attacking directly. They were repositioning the board. Unlike my father's generation, this new opposition was subtle, digital, global. No loud threats. No crude intimidation, just silent absorption. One evening, my head of analytics walked into my office with a look I hadn't seen before. Not fear, but clarity. They're consolidating land, she said. Who? I asked. We don't know yet, but it's coordinated. Small farms, storage facilities, rural transport hubs. all being purchased under different names. I studied the data. Individually, each acquisition meant nothing. Together, they formed a shadow network. They weren't competing in distribution. They were preparing to control production. A slow chokehold. I leaned back in my chair. They learned from us, I said quietly. If you can't defeat a decentralized system, you infiltrate its foundation. For weeks, we traced ownership layers. Eventually, a pattern surfaced, a private equity group headquartered overseas. Quiet, young leadership, no historical ties to the old conglomerates. But one name stood out on the advisory board, Daniel. My brother hadn't retired, he had adapted. Where my father ruled with dominance and visibility, Daniel had chosen invisibility. He wasn't rebuilding the old empire, he was building something leaner, smarter, patient. For a moment, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, respect. He had finally stopped underestimating me, which meant I could no longer underestimate him. Instead of confrontation, I requested a meeting. Neutral ground. No lawyers, no media. When he walked into the room, he looked different. Sharper. Calmer. You figured it out, he said without greeting. Had to? I replied. He smiled faintly. You changed the game? I decided to learn it. You're consolidating farms. I'm investing, he corrected. Farmers need liquidity, infrastructure needs modernization. You built ethics. I'm building efficiency. At the cost of independence. At the cost of chaos, he countered. For hours we spoke, not as brothers arguing, but as strategists dissecting ideology. You decentralize power, he said, but decentralization fractures under pressure. No unified defense, no centralized negotiation strength. And centralization corrupts, I replied. Only if it lacks accountability. Silence settled between us. Then he said something I didn't expect. I'm not here to destroy you. I studied his face carefully. I'm here to merge. The word hung in the air. Not acquisition, not takeover, merge. Our network plus yours, he continued, decentralized production with centralized logistics optimization, transparent governance structure, shared oversight. You expect me to trust you, I asked? No, he said calmly. I expect you to outsmart me if I try anything. It was bold, arrogant, but not reckless. For the first time, Daniel wasn't chasing dominance. He was proposing equilibrium. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I did what farming taught me long ago. I observed the soil before planning anything new. Over the next months, our teams quietly evaluated feasibility, legal frameworks, governance safeguards, voting protections ensuring no single entity could seize full control. If this merger happened, it would not resemble the old empire. It would be something unprecedented, a hybrid system balancing efficiency with fairness, but doubt lingered. Could I trust someone who once laughed as I was erased? Then I remembered something deeper. Revenge had already been harvested. What remained was legacy. If I refused purely out of pride, I would become what I once opposed, someone protecting ego over progress. So I set one condition, full public transparency of the merger negotiations. No backroom agreements, no hidden clauses. If we were building the future of agriculture, the public would witness its foundation. Daniel hesitated. Then he agreed. The announcement shocked the industry. Former rivals collaborating. Brothers once divided, now negotiating alliance. Critics predicted collapse. Analysts predicted monopoly 2-0. But as details emerged, decentralized voting protections, farmer equity guarantees, public compliance oversight, skepticism slowly transformed into cautious optimism. The merger finalized 6 months later. It wasn't flashy. No champagne galas, no triumphant speeches. Just signatures on documents that ensured no single leader, not me, not Daniel, could dominate unchecked. A system designed to outlive us both. The first year wasn't smooth. Integration always exposes friction. But slowly, synergy formed. Infrastructure strengthened. Farmer incomes stabilized further, global expansion accelerated responsibly. And something else happened. The attacks stopped, not because enemies vanished, but because the structure was too balanced to destabilize easily. Years later, standing once again at the annual shareholder gathering, now a public forum streamed worldwide, I looked at the skyline bearing our family name. It no longer represented fear or humiliation or revenge. It represented evolution. Daniel stood beside me, not as superior or subordinate. As counterpart, my father watched from the front row, older, quieter, but no longer carrying the weight of an empire built on intimidation. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't talk about victory. I spoke about soil. Empires built on fear crack, I said. Systems built on trust adapt. We learned that the hard way. Power without accountability collapses, but power shared responsibly sustains. There was no dramatic applause, just steady acknowledgement. After the event, I drove alone to the fields. Sunset painted the sky gold. Workers were finishing their day. Laughter drifted across rows of crops swaying gently in the wind. I stepped into the soil, letting it sink beneath my boots. This was where it began. Not with disownment, not with humiliation, but with choice. They had disowned me for being a simple farmer. They thought simplicity meant weakness. What they never understood was that farming is the purest form of long-term strategy. You prepare, you endure, you adapt, you harvest. Revenge was never the destination. It was the catalyst. The true victory wasn't watching them fall. It was ensuring no one would ever have the power to erase someone else the way I was erased. I once stood at the back of a gala hall while they laughed. Now I stand in open fields where no one bows. The skyline still carries our name, but the roots beneath it belong to something greater than pride. They belong to balance, and balance is the only power that truly lasts. This wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a story of reclamation, of transformation, of planting something better than what was torn down. They tried to bury me in the dirt. They forgot something important. Seeds grow in the dirt, and when they rise, they don't ask for permission.